We are back. It's another episode of the Better Learning Podcast, and we're always trying to get different perspectives on here, and we always talk about the three groupings of our listenership. So I'm gonna first bring in Alex Demczak here. And I already pronounced it wrong. It's
No, you said it. You said it right,
Did I
man.
say it right?
Yeah. Hey, as long as you say it with confidence, then it sounds great.
I could have confidence when I start, but then like afterwards, I'm like, oh, I totally screwed that
No,
up.
no, I think it was great, man. I think I've heard some other versions of Demczak that were not anywhere near that. So I give you a 9.5 out of 10
All
for
right,
sure.
sounds good. I mean, I get a lot of like strollers with the last name or like Stollers, and then and with my last name Stoller, I'm like, I just let it roll. Like whatever it is, we just go with it.
Hey, I've been called many worse things, so I'll take it, man.
Yeah. Well, we always want to have these conversations like this, and that's why we brought on Alex here because we're trying to hit these three different buckets that we're always talking about. It's like the school leaders that are trying to figure it all out, and they start in education, they put it into a leadership role, and they're trying to figure out how they can be best because now they're like serving like so many different people from the communities and their boards and all the teachers and staff, and then we also have a segment that's supporting just like education in general, and then there's also just like the change makers, the people that care about changing education. I think we're probably going to hit all three of those buckets, but I think this is going to be definitely more leadership focused. But would you mind, Alex, because I know like your background, football player, quarterback at Mizzou, turning into an author. I want to hear from your perspective. What was school? What was like that K through 12 experience like for you?
Man, it was a great experience. And so I grew up in public school and I loved all kinds of sports. And I would say, looking back, I probably should have worked a little bit harder in school, because football was at times my school, I think. But man, yeah, I actually spoke at a school yesterday to a group of educators. So thank you for having me, man, because I love, literally, I shared with this group yesterday. It was a quote from a guy named Billy Graham, and he said, a teacher or a coach will impact more people in 1 year than the average person will in a lifetime.
Without a doubt.
And yeah, and it's like if that is even close to being true, which I think it is, that is a huge like responsibility. It's a huge platform that educators have, and so yeah, man, that's why I'm here on this show with you because my life has been transformed in good ways and also in bad ways by different educators, and excited to share those different stories.
Yeah, well let's start with the good. Like, who are those ones that stand out when you think about? Yeah, I mean, your years going through school. Was there a certain one that you're like, man, that's the one that I can point to had the biggest impact?
Yeah, gosh, that's there's a guy actually named Ben Tyland, and he was my eighth grade math teacher, and it was really really sad. Unfortunately, a year and a half ago, he actually passed away unexpectedly. He got cancer, and within a few weeks, he was gone. And um, I look back at I mean, first off, amazing guy, amazing family. I hated math. I'm not good at math. I have to being self-employed. I have to worry about doing taxes and all that. That's about as much as math as I can handle. But man, this guy, he cared about people and kids, and he didn't just rush through his stuff. It's like he cared. He just saw you and for who you were, and so that's an example of someone who did it the right way, and he left us way too early. And another teacher I had named Aaron Sovereign. He was my fourth grade teacher. He's in Illinois as a teacher, and he's now a superintendent. And I remember vividly at recess, I was obsessed with football, and instead of just talking to all the teachers like a lot of them did, he was actually out there playing football with us. He was the quarterback. I remember catching a touchdown. And it's like those were memories I've never forgotten about. And the cool full circle thing is about a year and a half ago, he's at this school now in Illinois, and he actually brought me in to speak to his students and his staff. And I was like, oh my goodness, how full circle is that?
That's
Like,
really cool.
like a teacher who made a positive impact on my life. Now, years later, as I'm going around and speaking, he said, hey, I want you to come speak to my staff, my students. And I was almost emotional because I was like, this is exactly the picture of what it can look like when you lead in a way that your goal is to make an impact and a difference in kids' lives. And that's what he did in my life. And so that's why I was happy to make the trip to speak to his school because I'm like, this is what it's about, man. So those are some good examples right off the bat that I can think of just people who really do it the right way, did it the right way, and have allowed me to be who I am today because of those educators who took the time and they went out of their way. They did things that were not part of their job description to invest in people like me. And so grateful, man. And that's why I'm on your podcast,
Yeah.
because it's you're helping people grow in the same way, man. It's awesome.
Well, sometimes you learn from the bad examples too. You alluded to some of that. Uh, are there ones that stand out that like you saw it and you're like, oh, that was the example that I want to avoid, or it taught me a lesson. Even though it was painful at the time.
Yeah, it's very painful at the time, but I think you bring up a great point in that they're not always good. When I was in seventh grade, I was obsessed with baseball. So before my obsession with football, it was baseball. I remember watching the movie The Rookie like every day. If you remember that movie,
Yeah, that
it
was a
was
great
literally,
one.
yeah, it was about like a high school teacher who starts pitching and he ends up going to the majors. Great movie. And I remember thinking to myself like, I am going to be that guy someday. And so I loved baseball. And I had a coach in seventh grade. He was a very successful coach. Had a lot of notoriety. Just was a well-known guy. But I was a new kid at the school, and unfortunately, I mean, he was just very demeaning. Would just cuss at the top of his lungs, and as a seventh grader, I think there was definitely times where, whether I felt targeted or not, like I was targeted because I was the new kid. I don't know if it was kind of like we got to break this kid in to see if he'll last. I don't know what it was, but looking back, it's sad because I told my parents like after the first few practices, I said I want to quit. I'm done. I'm done with this. And baseball was my passion, so they're thinking, what in the world? And they said, you know what? We're not going to let you quit. You're going to finish what you started, and I'm glad they did, and they instilled that lesson in me. But after my seventh grade year, I quit baseball, not because I didn't love it. It's because I literally through that experience, like I just started hating baseball, and here we are years later talking about this, and it's like, who knows what I would have done in baseball, or what would that would who knows what would have come of me sticking with it. But I was way more passionate about baseball than I was football, and so I seem to think that, man, it could have looked a lot differently if I had a coach who said, look, I'm going to invest in you. I'm going to be positive in the way I coach. I'm going to be hard on you, but in the right way. And so I think that is sad to me. That is sad to me that I'm giving you this example of an educator who took the other road and said, you know what, I have a power trip, or I'm going to demean other people. Now, I've chosen to forgive him for the things he did and the ways that he acted, and I personally moved on from that. I mean, this was in seventh grade, right? But I share this as an example because there's educators listening on this podcast that they have the platform to either make a positive difference or a negative difference. And I think about something that I talk about often at speaking engagements is, are you as an educator, are you a trust builder or are you a trust breaker? And unfortunately that person just it, I quit. And
Yeah.
looking back, I maybe should have been a little bit mentally stronger and tougher, and I probably should have. But as a seventh grader, I just didn't have that, and I gave it up. And so I just think it speaks to the stewardship responsibility, like the word stewardship. It means to cultivate, or to make something better, or to grow it, or to take responsibility of it. And I think educators, especially today, have such a responsibility of stewardship, of saying, okay, these are the people that have been entrusted under my leadership. Now, what am I going to do to steward them well under my leadership?
Thank you for sharing that. I mean, that's a great example to show how it could. I mean, that it's a delicate relationship that happens, and it does have an impact for the rest of your life. It sounds like you've come to good terms with that. I always think of like hearing Tony Robbins speak, like the motivational speaker.
Yeah,
Like people who are struggling to get over something from the past. It's like taking that perspective of not only forgiving and then also saying like thank you, like even though like that experience was bad, it helped create to who I am now, and
exactly.
to be able to move forward from that. But it is amazing how probably everyone has stories like that.
Mm, 100%. And I just think it speaks to the impact that you can make. Going back to the Billy Graham quote, I mean, the amount of students, the amount of parents, the amount of people that you are able to impact as an educator is unbelievable. And on the flip side, I usually share a story, and maybe some of your educators listening have seen this video on YouTube. It's amazing. I shared it at the end of my talk yesterday, and what it is, it's a essentially the video is a second grade teacher who has this student in her second grade class, and she writes a handwritten note at the end of the year, and she says, "Hey, um, don't forget to invite me to your Harvard graduation
Wow.
someday." Have you seen that
I have
video?
not. No.
Oh, you got to watch it. It's so good. It's on YouTube. But she essentially says, "Don't forget to invite me to Harvard graduation." Well, sure enough, years later, she goes to Harvard. She goes to Harvard, and Harvard gets light of the story and the message. And so they fly the teacher out to the graduation. They fly her out and pay for everything and do it. And it was just like, I mean, if you're an educator, you cannot watch that video without tearing up. You got to have a tissue because it just speaks to the like that is what it's all about, and it's being intentional to speak truth and to encourage someone, because I think that's to your point earlier on leadership. That is leadership. You are believing in someone when maybe they don't even believe in themselves. Like that second grader, she probably didn't even know what Harvard was when she was in second grade, right? But this teacher saying, "Hey, invite me to your Harvard graduation." She saw that in her. She spoke that over her, and then now years later, look what happens. And so I think with social media and all of the different accessibilities and all the things we have, man, like more than ever, people just human to human, people need in this age of AI and all this fake stuff. It's like people just need that human connection, and they need to be encouraged. And I think there's just such an opportunity in our schools today for that. And when you're around a coach or an educator who gets it and who lives that, kids flock to those teachers because they're like they're craving it. They're used to scrolling on TikTok all day on their phones. When they're around a teacher who's investing in them and saying, "Hey, I'm here for you. What do you need? I'm going to meet you where you're at." It's like that is those are the memorable teachers who really make a very positive impact on students.
And it's one of those that we always talk about. They're playing the long game. I mean, to get that reward of a second grader and then getting that reward when they graduate from Harvard, that's a long investment in there to see that return. But the best educators view it that way. And I know there's a lot that's put on educators right now where it looks more at the short term.
Mm.
And there's definitely not enough talk or ways to bring that in. I mean, it's just the nature of the game is that the educators that really can make that investment and kind of like ignore some of the things and have the bigger picture in there.
Yeah.
That to me is the name of the game, and really where like leadership can really help reinforce
Mm.
that. If they could get some more of like those short-term rewards, be like, hey, you're doing the right thing, you're doing the right thing, even though like everything else that's thrown at them maybe telling them they should be focusing in other areas.
Yeah, well, I do something when I go to schools where if I'm speaking to teachers, I'll say, "Hey, raise your hand if you've been teaching for 1 year." And I say, keep them raised, 5 years, 10 years, 20. Yesterday, it got up to almost four, I think it was 32 years was in the room. And it's like, first off, that's amazing to commit your life, your career to educating the next generation for 32 years. Like, psh, oh my goodness, that's amazing, right? And, but it's like I tell them, I say, okay, you have someone that's been here for 32 years, and I say, raise your hand if it's your first year as a teacher, and a good amount of people raise their hand. So I'm like, anywhere on the spectrum, if it's your first year as an educator or it's your 32nd year, like how do you want to look back on your time as an educator? Like if you could look, like to your point, if you could look forward and say, okay, I'm going to reverse engineer this, like someday at my teacher retirement party, I'm assuming they do those these days still, teacher retirement party, there's cake, there's balloons, and what do you want people to say about you? Like, what do you want that room to look like? And I think if you're a teacher who, as John Gordon, my co-author, talks about all the time, love, serve, and care as an educator, if you're intentional, he's the author of The Energy Bus. If you're intentional to love, serve, and care others, that room, that retirement room is going to look pretty good. It's going to be a lot of people there. It's probably going to be standing room only. It's not. It's going to be tough to get a piece of cake because everyone's going to be there's so many people there. But the opposite is true as well. What would it look like if you spend 20 years in education and to you it's just a job and you don't invest in the kids, and well, that retirement party is going to look a lot different. And I think we can all think of educators in our lives, mentors, people who have demonstrated integrity to us, and that's what our book is about, is leading with integrity. And the root word of integrity is integer. And think about in math, which I told you before I don't like, but math is an integer. It's a whole number. It's a complete number. And when you think about the fully integrated leader, that person, if you think back to any time in your life where someone has made the greatest impact in your life, maybe it's a teacher, it's a coach, it's a parent, it's a mentor. When you think about that person and the positive impact they've had on your life, most likely they have demonstrated high levels of integrity. They not only talked the talk, they walked the walk. Like, they were there for you when you needed them. And so I think that's a big part of the message as educators is, how do you bridge that gap? How do you get over generational differences? How do you meet them where they are at? But you're there for them. You're building trust with them. You are getting this relational equity with them, so that when it's 10 o'clock at night and they need someone to call because they have things going on at home, or they can have anyone to call, they're texting or calling you. And not that it's always super fun to get those calls, but it's meaningful. And to your point on the long-term game, those are the long-term things that you look back on as an educator and say, wow, I was able to have an impact on that person's life, or they were able to have an impact on my life. And it's because I was intentional. I asked the tough questions. I was there for them. I did those things. And I just think, honestly, right now, our culture, sometimes, I just think we could use a lot more of those teachers, a lot more of those educators. And I think people listening to your show are exactly that. It's people pursuing that. So that's why I love what you're doing, man, because ever since the pandemic, right, there's all these differences on, is it homeschool, is it private school, is it public, all these different opinions, right? And I just think more than ever we need amazing educators. I have a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old, and so this is very relevant to me in the sense that like, where will I be entrusting my own kids in a few years, and that's a relevant conversation that me and my wife I'll have all the time, and she's a former first grade teacher, and so yeah, we're just kind of in the middle of even having those conversations ourselves. So hey, if you have any advice for me, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
man, this is all such
you're at the
important
fun
stuff.
age. Yeah, yeah. If you got the young ones where it's like, yeah, it's more
Yeah,
about like energy of like, can we survive the day? And then as they
energy
get older,
management.
it becomes a different difficult. It's yeah, it moves into more just variety. Our kids are 16, 12, and 8, and yeah, and we've seen a lot of that going through, and just like the differences for each one of those kids.
Mm,
They just need different things, and to your point, it's like it can be a coach, it could be a teacher, it can be coming from a variety of different ways, but
mm,
those other adults are just so needed.
mm.
And the teaching profession has always been one of those places to do it, but it does feel like recently, the view is like, don't go into education, don't go there, and we do need to start changing that perception, and that's also on the school leaders of like, how do we make this more
Mm.
appealing? How do we block all the junk out to let teachers do? Because I don't think we're at a shortage of people wanting to help the next generation. I think we're at a
Yeah,
shortage of people who want to deal with the junk that comes with education.
exactly. That's a great point, because I recently saw on my local news they did a thing. They're trying to recruit more teachers for this year, and they have this policy that they're instituting, and it's called it's like something along the lines of hire on the spot policy, because they're this certain school district in Missouri that I saw, they are so desperate right now to find people that are willing, like you said, to become a full time teacher. They are meeting these teachers at fairs, college or job fairs, and saying, "Hey, your resume, there it is. Okay, well, guess what? We're going to offer you the job on the spot." And it's just, I think, like, to your point, it speaks to, like, there are the people out there, but is there so much red tape? Is there so much control? What are the things that need to happen to be changed so that those teachers can thrive? And I think about my wife. She now stays home with our kids, but so many of her friends who are teachers are no longer teachers, and it's not just because they're stay-at-home moms; they're doing other things. And I just think, how do you retain those amazing, talented teachers? That then go and do something else. And so those are questions probably bigger than I can answer on this show. But those, like you said, those are for some of those school leaders and things like that. But it is interesting to see, like, when you think about trends, and I think about, okay, my 1-year-old son, in 17 years, when he's thinking about college, or however many years, whenever he'd start thinking about that, like what is that landscape going to look like? It's very interesting post pandemic, what things look like. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Oh man, we can talk a lot about this. I well, let's go there, and then I'll pull in some other things because I do think this is an important conversation of somebody who isn't full time invested, or your career is not full time dealing with schools, and a lot of our audience is. So sometimes they like are in it too much. They can't really see like what's going on in kind of like the average household with parents, the conversations that are
Mm.
happening at home, being there. So maybe I'll just ask some questions. What are the first things that you're going to look at when you're trying to figure out what are the best schools? Because now we're in a world where there's choice. So
Yeah.
I'm assuming, like, I don't know Missouri how, but there's some choice now, whether
Yeah.
it's like full like blown out charter schools or things like that.
Yeah.
But what are the things that you're going to look at in a couple of years where you're like, all right, I got to figure out where to send my kindergarten?
Yeah, I mean that's a great question. I mean these are the literal things we're processing right now, me and my wife Erin. So, I mean for us, I just think coming, post pandemic, here in Missouri, I would say, um, yeah, like you said, there are a lot of different options. We literally, I mean, for one, we live in a neighborhood where there's like a school like within walking distance, so I will say that is a factor.
Yeah, for
That
sure.
would be pretty nice. But I don't know. I just think it was so hard. We didn't have kids who went through the pandemic in the schools. They were either not born or too young, and so we didn't have to navigate that like so many parents did. But yeah, I don't know. Just thinking through, making sure that they have access and they're able to be in person and do things like that. I just think is a big factor. I think yeah, I don't know. That's really a tough question because I mean, you kind of have. That's probably the best question you've asked all day because you put me on the spot here because it's like where we are literally processing that right now. And my wife, as a former first grade teacher, she has a lot of amazing thoughts. And so it'll be interesting to see where we land. But I think it's you know I think college a little bit factors in because it's like, all right, if we did do private school, for example, do we do private school and then pay for college? Like, there's all these different things you think about, right? Or it's like, okay, do you do public school and then try to pay for college? So I don't know. Like, these are questions that like maybe I need to ask you because you have kids
Oh,
way older than ours, and you
I
already have this
I
figured
think it's
out,
I think
probably.
it's interesting that college is even getting factored in at 3 and 1, right? But I think that's a great representation
Mm,
of way parents are viewing things, of and it really comes back to just like the much bigger picture of like what is the purpose of K-12 education? Like when
that's
when
good.
they're 18, what do you really want?
Exactly, and that's a great point because if I think about, I'm a millennial, and my age group, we saw all of our parents in 2008 go through, the recession, right? And we saw that. We saw how it affected our, like as a generation, we saw our parents that happen. And um, so now, as we are thinking about, like, we went through college, it's like, okay, do I want my future kids to take out all of this student loan debt to then get like a minimum wage job out of college? Like that seems crazy to me. And so that's where my mind goes to, okay, as a self-employed person and I can provide for my family and do all these things, it's like I technically didn't need college to do what I'm doing today. I mean, it was helpful and you meet people, but I didn't need it technically. And so it's like, what if my daughter wants to become a real estate agent? I mean, you could go get your license. And so, like, I guess maybe I'm thinking too far ahead, but I think to your point, it's like, okay, these trade schools, they're becoming so popular. Homeschooling, all these different options are like going crazy, right? Since the pandemic, and it almost like accelerated that. So, yeah, I don't know if I'm thinking about the right way. You tell me if I am, but I think it's just trying to think ahead of like, all right, will they be attending college, and will college be, how much will it be per year? Like what's that even going to look like? Or right now I speak a lot of small colleges. A lot of these small colleges since the pandemic, they're going out a bit. I mean, they're
Yeah, they're
shutting their
struggling.
doors. And
Yeah.
so it's like, and from a sports perspective too, you talk about NIL or all these things. It's like, how do these small colleges, some of them, they're going through some tough times, and so I mean that's going to be interesting to play out. So
Yeah, I feel like we're starting to see the early signs on that. Like, I have a brother who works for one of the smaller colleges, and they just like absorbed another college that was
yeah,
close by because it is really hard for them to make it. right now. It's an interesting dynamic. I'll give you a little bit of like of us being like, 10, 12, 15, like
Yeah.
years a little further. We didn't think about it. We grew up, or where we were at the time where our oldest was going to school. It was the same thing. We had a neighborhood school. There was not even like any thought. It was like, this is where they go. Good reputation, good school, and we didn't think anything about it. And then we moved to Arizona when our oldest was going into fourth grade and our middle one was going into kindergarten. And we're like, what in the world is going on out here? Like, if we go to like the park in our neighborhood and you start asking where they go to school, there's like 12 different schools that you get answers from.
Wow.
It's like total open enrollment. You can go anywhere. And there's a lot of good and bad to that. I've talked about that in the past on the show, of just the good and the bad of that. But what it has forced us to do is start thinking about, like, what do we really want for our kids? And for me, and my wife, like, we answer is we want them to be. We're not trying to raise kids. We're trying to raise adults. So
Good.
that's been our perspective of, like, we want them to be kind. We want them to be helpful. We want them to enjoy life. We want them to have joy. But the biggest thing is, for us, is like, we want them to have service towards others. Like, if they are helping others, that's probably the best thing they can do for their personal health, as well as others around them. And to me, it truly started out as a joke. So I don't know if this formed some of my opinion was, but also being self-employed, I was always like, well, I'm not saving for college, so they're gonna have to pay for college on their own. So I would always just answer that of, like, yeah, like, they're not going to college. Like, so it started as a joke, but then I feel like I've seen kind of this movement, this kind of change in approach from parents of starting to say, like, is college really needed? I think there's a lot of factors, around student debt and just around, like, kind of the pressures of all kind of the institutional of, like, testing and everything, like, just the sole focus on college, that I feel like there is definitely some backlash to it. But it's a tough one, as our oldest is getting to that point. Like,
Yeah.
do we encourage it? Do we discourage it? Do we just let him go his own path?
Yeah, and I just can't even. Yeah, that's crazy. So you guys are literally in the middle of navigating that. I can't even fathom in 15 years what it's going to look like, it's just really interesting to think about what that will be, from seeing what the trends will be like. And so, yeah, man, maybe we need to schedule another podcast in about 10 years, and
Yeah,
so then we can
exactly.
with each other, you'll still have this thing going. I'm sure you'll have millions of listeners like you already do, but we'll have to get that on the schedule, because we'll be talking about crazy trends, I'm sure, then. But yeah, this is interesting to talk about, because so many people my age, especially other entrepreneurs that I'm friends with, they are just going, they are just looking at very alternative routes.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just super interesting. And so I think tying that all that in, it's like, when you, like yesterday when I spoke to this group of teachers, meeting some of them, it's like, when you're around teachers that care, they get it, they could be doing other jobs, but they are in it for, like, the right reasons. Wow, those teachers stand out. They stand out, and they're the type of teachers that the kids flock to, the adults love. And so I just think
Yeah.
that's a cool way to think about it, is, if you're in education listening to this and you're going, okay, so much uncertainty, it's like, if you keep doing what you're doing, being excellent in what you've been given, and encouraging the things that you just talked about, it's like, that's, at the end of the day, at the end of your career, at the end of your life, you're going to look back and say, wow, like, I'm really glad that I did it this way. I can't control all the other school stuff. I can't control whatever, but I can control me, and the excellence that I bring every day. Um, um, yeah, my good friend Jimmy Casas, I don't know if you've had him on the show, but he talks about excellence and things like that. So I just think, man, in education, there's such an opportunity. And so, man, I appreciate you asking those questions, though, because
Yeah, thanks for. I
it,
mean, it's a
yeah,
great. I think it's really beneficial to the audience to start hearing, like, these are the things that parents are talking about, because I know what they're faced with every day. Like, I spend a lot of
yeah,
time with school leaders, and like, it is stuff that, unfortunately, is not always focus on education. They have so many
Mm.
other things they have to be thinking about, and that's why I think we're seeing some of this. I call it the fragmentation of where it used to be like for the most part public school, maybe a little bit of private school. Now we're seeing a whole bunch of different like micro schools and homeschooling and
Wow.
charters and all these different like alternatives that are popping up, and they really need to pay attention to it because I think it's going to
Yeah.
happen really fast.
I think so, and I think you need to write a book on that, man. I like how you use that terminology. I don't know if do you already have a book on it. You might need to get working on
Not
that. I
on
don't
that.
know.
I'm trying to think of what the next book is, but
Yeah, yeah, but no, I think you're right, and I guess now that I've had a minute or two to think about it, I think one thing that we've talked about when you said like, what are you guys considering? I just think something that we've noticed since the pandemic in some ways is that at some of these schools, again, I live in Missouri, so this maybe doesn't apply to everyone listening, but because it has been at times hard for these schools to retain really good talent, at times it can feel like, is this almost the backup teacher that my kid, my child, I'm going to give them to 8 hours a day, and it's someone who maybe doesn't want to be there, but they're just like doing a job, and it's like, is that the best for my kid who I love and I want to flourish, or is it like my wife, who's a former first grade teacher, who could invest in them, or a private school? Like we don't know
yeah,
the answers there yet, and so we're still processing. But like I think just to let you in on my mind of, I'm not in education, I'm not even employed at a normal job. I'm self-employed or whatever, like entrepreneur. So take whatever I'm saying with a grain of salt for anyone listening. But these are the things that like me and other entrepreneurs, friends, are processing because we're like, man, what is this going to look like? So whether it's a co-op or a who knows what.
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah, yeah. And I don't. I mean, the interesting thing is nobody knows the answer right now because education is such that long game.
mm,
But I do think it's interesting to watch everything that's going on and start looking at kind of the early signs and be like, what can we learn from each other in
mm.
there? So yeah, I didn't think our conversation was going to go that route. We did have your co-author John Gordon on the show. How did you
Oh,
guys get
cool.
connected?
Yeah, that's incredible. Was his episode pretty good?
Yeah, yeah, we talked. I mean, his
Oh
positive,
man,
yeah,
he
energy
is. I
mentality
mean,
to it.
yeah, for any of the school leaders listening, I mean, if you have not had John come to your school and speak, you need to. He's one of the best out there in the country, when it comes to education and so and leadership. And so we met. He spoke to when I was on the team at Mizzou as a senior. He spoke to the athletic department, and I connected with him afterwards. And I told him, I said, I don't know what you just did, but I said I want to do that when I'm a grown up, essentially, when I grow up someday. I said, I want to do that. And I said, is there any way I can learn from you? Can I be mentored by you? Whatever. And he said, well, are you willing to work for free? He was kind of like testing me. And I didn't really have a job. I was making much money. I didn't, whatever. And I'm like, sure. Right. And so I start, managing his LinkedIn, doing some sales for him, doing different things. And I think really what it was is just I was trying to add value however I could. And because I'm like, you know what? I see what he's doing. I know I want to pursue that type of work when I, in air quotes, grow up someday. And so that was probably about 8 years ago. And so year after year, I'd continue to do sales for him. Then, his books like The Energy Bus or The Power of Positive Leadership, he can't speak at every event. And so when he get an inquiry from a school district to do an event, he'd be like, hey, Alex, I can't speak at this one. You go speak at it. And so that's where I got my start in speaking, is I would speak on his books. And then in 2022, we came out with The Sale that we co-authored. It's called The Sale, but it's not a book about sales. It's a book. It's a fable about leadership and leading with integrity. And so that's why a lot of schools use it, because it's just a great, I don't know, it's a good book study. It's a good way to kick off the school year to talk about, are you building trust? Are you a person who is excellent in the way that you treat students? Are you a teacher that demonstrates integrity in the small things? And so yeah, it's been a really fun ride with John, just to speak on his books, speak on the sale message that we think is so important today in education. And so that's how we got connected. But ultimately, I think people ask me a lot of, hey, what's your best advice for starting your own thing or going into business or whatever? And I tell people all the time, it's find someone who is a mentor, someone who's ahead of you, and try to learn, do whatever you can to learn from them, and that's invaluable. And And that's what I've done with John, and he's been super gracious. And so I think for anyone listening, if you're going, hey, I'm looking for a side hustle, I want to become a superintendent someday, whatever. What are you doing to take steps to be around the people who are doing the things that you want to do? And yeah, I think, and then just add value to those people. Don't, because a guy like John Gordon or Jimmy Casas or Todd Whitaker, all these education people, it's like they get asked every day, like you, I'm sure, do for different requests or do. It's like, but if you can show them, hey, I'm going to add value to you and ask nothing in return, that stands out and it's memorable. And so, I think, yeah, it's been really fun to learn from him. And we have some other exciting things that we're talking about and working on. But yeah, it's I just think his message of the energy bus. I'm sure a lot of your listeners have listened to it. It's so important because it's what does it look like to have a school culture and a classroom culture that encourages kids and allows them to just be people that grow up to, like you said, not to be kids, but you're raising adults. And yeah, that's how we connected. And still was texting him right before this episode, and we're just I'm just really gracious to learn from him and his wife Catherine. She's awesome as well, and the whole John Gordon team as well.
Well, kudos to you to take that on. I mean, it's really goes back just kind of like the old days of like apprenticeships, of find somebody who's really good and spend some time with them and learn from them. And that kind of went away for a while. And like I get it, like not everyone's in the situation where they can work for free or do that. But I do think like whether it's, like a side thing, finding people that you respect and knowledge and view it and be like, you know what, my $15 an hour versus the knowledge. Again, like I fully recognize not everyone's in the position to be able to do that, but it does feel like sometimes the younger generation is in, it's hard to blame them when you can go get a job at $15 or $25 an hour when you're 18 or 20 years old. But sometimes that value of being able to be around someone and really learn from them side by side should not. There's just so much value in that. And I think like we kind of lost a little bit of that. Like my generation had tons of unpaid internships. Like that's how we learned. Those days are almost gone. Like they're like, even legally, it's really hard to even do like unpaid internships.
Oh, it's so true, and it's honestly, it's I think a generational thing too. Millennials and Gen Z, it's like we have so many good qualities and ways that we want to do work that we're passionate about. But in the same time, like I'll be honest, there's just a lot of in our generation, like there are just there's just some people that are very entitled and they think, hey, if I come out of college, I need to be making X salary, and it's like, but have you actually added value? Have you to the organization you work for? Have you actually put in the work? And so, I mean, a great example is you mentioned, the old days of being an apprentice. It's true. Think about today if you showed up and said, you know what, I want to be a plumber, so I'm going to go job shadow a plumber for a week. And if that plumber actually shows up on time, does good work, has integrity, that plumber is going to make a lot of money because people don't want to do that hard work. And even thinking about John Gordon, he's just published his like 31st book, and about two years ago, I co-founded a company called Streamline Books, and so we help people write and publish their book. We just signed our 127th author, which is awesome. It's like we help people share their stories. Yeah, it's like educators, superintendents, all kinds of people, principals, coaches. We get to help them share their story, and it's like it would have never happened if I didn't have the mentorship of someone like John and seeing how he leveraged his books. And now it's like, man, I love writing my own books and speaking in schools, but I also love helping an educator who's saying, hey, I have a message to share. I don't have the time to write a book. I don't have the I'm busy, but like I have all the stories up here. And that's where like our team, they'll pair you with a writer, with an editor, with a project manager. And it's like, that gets me fired up because it's like, that can help you make an impact on other people around you. And I think about one of our superintendents recently, his name's Dr. Anthony Rice. He's a superintendent in California, great guy. He just published a book through Streamline, and it's just awesome. He's posting pictures on social media of him speaking about it and people buying the book, and it's just like, that's what it's all about. So I do think, to your point, find the area of interest, find where you're trying to go, get around those people, because that is the best way you learn.
Yeah, very cool. Well, that's a good way to wrap things up here. We will have your information in the show notes here too. I mean, our theme, so our company K-12, where we work with schools and we create better learning environments. So we're working with the furniture side of things, and then we also have another organization of Education Leaders Organization, which is this confidential peer network for school leaders. But we talk about just the power of storytelling and trying to meet people where they're at, whether it is in books or through video or social media, being able to just really tell compelling stories. It's it's like as much as we want to sit here and say like people make decisions like on logic, stories are so powerful, that emotional piece. So I love hearing that, of being able to get some of those stories out from school leaders and others that have messages that just need to be out there.
Yeah, man, that's awesome. Well, I mean, even Kevin, just for you, just so you hear on the podcast, for any of your listeners, if anyone reaches out to us from this show, we'll give them the Kevin discount. So we'll give them the Kevin discount if they want to publish their book. We'll make sure we hook them up, because yeah, we just love working with educators, and yeah, it's awesome.
Very cool. All right. So to the listeners, if you like conversations like this, just hit subscribe wherever you're listening to. BetterLearningPodcast.com is our hub for everything on the podcast. So show notes, everything are in there, but as well as there's a form where you can put in suggestions for either topics, speakers, if you think you'd be a good guest on the show. So we review that in our production meetings and try to figure out who are the best ones to bring to our audience. So Alex, it was great talking to you. Great meeting you.
Kevin, thanks for having me. Loved our time together, and keep making an impact.
The views and opinions expressed on the Better Learning Podcast are those of myself as an individual and my guests, and do not necessarily represent the organizations that we work for, the Association for Learning Environments, K-12, Education Leaders Organization, or Second Class Foundation.